Okay, we've got the situation of a monopoly, and it's the same example of the chocolate box guy before. Drawn up the demand curve, he's got a marginal revenue curve, and the example I had was that his marginal cost was $5 for each box, which was the average cost. To keep things simple, this is the wholesale price he pays for them. I've drawn this in where I've drawn the marginal cost line, the same as the average cost line. And I said the place where he's going to maximize his economic profit is where the marginal cost crosses the marginal revenue at this point here. So we can do it mathematically now, because it's going to say the marginal cost 5 must equal marginal revenue, so 12 minus Q has to equal 5, in which case now we can see that the quantity, monopolist quantity, is going to be 7, where he maximizes. You do it 12 minus Q is equal to 5. We didn't have that before, and because it wasn't quite as precise in the calculation. Now we can get it exactly right. In this case, if the quantity sold is going to be 7, you can go back to the demand curve and figure out that the price has to be $8.50. You see 12 minus a half times 7. So he's going to charge you $8.50, and he's going to sell you 7 boxes. This assumes that he understands, he knows your demand curve. So we can see now the total cost is this area below the marginal cost curve. 5 times 7 is $35. And his profit, well, he's going to sell 7 times $8.50. That's about whatever that works out, $59.50 is the total revenue, less the $35. These numbers don't quite match out, but in any event. The purple areas is economic profit. So the question then becomes, can he do better than this? Can he get a bit more money out of you, in a sense? Can he get you to take more cash out of your wallet, and in effect also increase his economic profit? And one way to do that, if he could, would be, since he knows your demand curve, is to somehow charge you a higher price, like $11. But if he charges you a high price of $11, you only buy 2 boxes. And we've seen that he's not going to maximize economic profit. So the idea here is to have 2 prices. In effect, what he could do, if possible, he would sell you the first 2 boxes at $11 each. You would buy those boxes, and then he would call after you and say, hey, come back, I'm going to sell you 5 more boxes at $8.50. If he were capable of doing that, he would still sell you 7 boxes, but you'll notice something. He'd get extra economic profit, this extra purple area here, because he'd be charging you $11 for 2 boxes and then 5 more boxes at a lower price. The process of doing this is referred to as price discrimination. In effect, what it amounts to is selling, in effect, the same thing, same good or service at 2 different prices. So we're going to take a look at this idea and see what's possible for the firm. In marketing, and I think more in marketing than it is in economics, but they refer to 3 degrees or 3 types of price discrimination. So let me just list them here quickly. The first degree price degree discrimination would be sometimes called hurdle pricing, and the idea here is that the seller finds the amount that each customer would be willing to pay. So as if they treat each customer as a separate market. This is unlikely, although some examples, I've talked to medical doctors that have done this. This is in private system where they've in effect charged wealthy people a high price for a particular surgical intervention, and then a lower price for poor people. Same thing arrives if you've ever been into a market in the Middle East where you sit down with the person. There's no prices indicated on any item. Sit down with the person, you start haggling, you have a negotiation, cup of tea, talk to the person. In effect, what they're doing is finding out who you are, where your background is, how much money you have, and then also what price to charge you on your demand curve. I suppose you could argue used car salesmen do something of the same sort. This is a form of first degree price discrimination. Second degree would be when you charge the same customer different prices for the same. That's the example we just looked at. And this is sometimes referred to as a quantity discount, where they say you buy 2 at $4 and then you get the third one at only $1. So in effect, there's like selling you what we consider a deal, but it amounts to charging different prices for the same quantity, same good. The third degree price discrimination is when you in effect treat the good as being sold in 2 different markets. And Sometimes you can think of this as being geographical. So it means like, you have Starbucks coffee at the airport, Starbucks coffee at a coffee shop in the center of the city. And then you can say geographically different. But maybe a better way of thinking about it is being geographically the same place, but just two different clientele, two different, in which, in all cases, of course, whether it's geographic or it's clientele, there is some way to separate out the customer, so there's clear who is who and who is separate from whom. And so in this case, now we're just treating them as two different. This is the example we're going to look at right now. So you've got a famous museum somewhere in the world. And it's obviously a monopoly, because if you want to see this famous painting or whatever it is in the museum, you've got to go to that museum. They're the only people that have the Mona Lisa or whatever it happens to be. So we've got a demand curve. I'm going to once again just assume, to keep things simple, that the marginal cost is constant. So that means it's equal to the average cost. And once again, we can put in the, let's say, for example, at present they're charging this X price, whatever it happens to be, and there's 1,000 people that enter the museum at this price. So far, that we just assume, we haven't drawn in the marginal revenue curve, but I just assume it's there, and the museum has figured this out. They whatever the maximum price is for 1,000 people. But then the museum notices that amongst these 1,000 tickets sold per day, let's say, they can notice that there's actually two types of people that enter the museum. There's foreign tourists, and then there's also local people that just want to see the paintings. So you can sort of imagine, just to keep things simple again, as amongst 1,000 people entering, there's, let's say, 300 are foreign tourists, and the other people, this other 700 are locals. So they're all paying the same price. But what the museum could do is then trace out, do some data, do a bit of marketing research, and do some trace out a demand curve for each of these groups separately. So I've just done this quickly here. Imagine this is the demand curve for the foreigners, call it DF, and we've got another demand curve for the local people. And of course, the two demand curves added together horizontally would give us the current demand curve for all together. That is DF plus DL. So you can see it here, that if you were to add these curves horizontally, you'd wind up with the demand curve on the right. But at the same time, each one of these demand curves, whether it's for the foreigners or for the local people, has, in effect, a marginal revenue curve. And you can treat them as completely two different markets if you want. But let's do it that way. We'll treat them as two different markets. So here I've got the demand curve for foreigners. I'm going to draw in another marginal revenue curve, as we've done in the past. I can put in the marginal cost. The marginal cost we'll assume is the same whether you're letting a foreigner into the museum or you're letting a local person into the museum. It's going to be the same cost. You have to clean up afterwards. You have to sell them a ticket, and so on and so forth. And we'll think that the congestion cost of too many people in the museum at a particular moment is constant. So we match up the point where the marginal revenue of the foreigners matches up with the cost, and we pick the number of foreigners that we want to allow into the museum to maximize the economic profit, and we charge them PF, let's call it. Now, at the same time, though, we've got the same marginal cost, and now let's take a look at the demand curve for the local people. We've got the same curves I had a moment ago. We've got a marginal revenue curve associated with that demand curve, and we can now find the point where the marginal revenue of the local people, the demand curve, keeping in mind, too, what marginal revenue represents. You drop the price a little bit, you're going to have fewer people coming into the museum, and so that has an effect on the total revenue from local people, local ticket buyers. So where the marginal revenue for the local people equals the marginal cost, we can find the number of tickets we want to sell to the locals, and we've got now the price that we'll charge the local market. Keep in mind, they're both buying a ticket to get into the same museum. So everything's the same between the two. What drives the difference here is the shape of the demand curve for foreigners and the demand curve for locals. That's what leads to a difference in the marginal revenue curve. The other thing, too, of course, I'm assuming, is that the marginal cost for supplying this to local people is the same as it would be for foreigners. There's no, in terms of cost, there's no difference.